Hello, welcome to Simple Spanish Sentences. This is the first video in a playlist on Spanish verb tenses and moods. In it, I'm going to give a very basic introduction to Spanish verbs and how they're used. This will include what verbs are, infinitives, conjugating verbs, conjugating Spanish verbs, pronouns, and regular and irregular verbs. This is a very simple introduction, and hopefully it will help lay the foundation for following videos in this playlist. First, what are verbs? These are words that describe actions, occurrences, or states of being. Second, what are infinitives? This is a specific verb form which involves the word to plus a verb. For example, to eat, to run, or to work. Note how the infinitive differs from other forms. So he needs to work is different from he worked, he is working, and he will work. In Spanish, infinitives can take three forms depending on how the verbs end. There are AR endings, such as to work, which is trabajar, ER endings, such as to eat, which is comer, and IR endings, such as to write, which is escribir. Note that it's common to learn the infinitive form of a verb before learning how it's conjugated. Part of why this may be useful is because in many cases the way a verb gets conjugated is influenced by what kind of verb it is. So for example, an AR verb may get conjugated one way, and an ER or IR verb may get conjugated another way. Third, conjugating verbs. This deals with how verbs change in order to communicate different kinds of information. This could be information about the verb person or number, and that deals with who or how many people are doing something. For example, I eat versus we eat. It also deals with verb tense, which focuses on when something is happening. For example, I eat versus I ate. And it also deals with verb mood, which in a way deals with the kind of statement that's being made. For example, there can be commands, such as don't eat the fruit, descriptions, such as he's eating the fruit, and hypothetical wishes, such as it would be nice if he would eat the fruit. Four, conjugating Spanish verbs. In general, when conjugating Spanish verbs, the verb itself tends to change a lot more than in English, and some of these changes can convey information about who is doing the verb. In English, we typically will add additional words like pronouns to do this. For example, I eat, you eat, they eat, and so on. And in these cases, the pronouns I, you, and they tell us who's doing the act. Meanwhile, eat by itself doesn't. However, in Spanish, it's more common for the verb itself to change in order to convey this kind of information. So for example, comer is to eat, como is I eat, and comemos is we eat. Note that no separate word for the pronoun I or we is needed, and because of this, the Spanish pronouns are often omitted. With that said, there are some exceptions. For example, some verbs are conjugated the same way. As an example, he eats is come, and you eat when talking to one person formally is also come. Sometimes the context makes it clear which one you mean, so no pronoun is needed. But if the context doesn't make it clear, then you should use a pronoun. In those cases, he eats would be él come, and you eat would be usted come. Pronouns may be used in other situations, but this is the main use that beginners should be aware of. With that said, it's worth briefly covering what the Spanish pronouns are. I in Spanish is yo. You, when talking to one person in an informal setting, is tú. He is él. She is ella. You, when talking to one person in a formal setting, is usted. We is nosotros if referring to all men or a group of men and women, and nosotras if referring to all women. You, when referring to multiple people in an informal setting and in Spain, is vosotros if referring to all men or a group of men and women, and vosotras if referring to all women. They is ellos if referring to all men or a group of men and women, and ellas if referring to all women. And finally, you, when referring to multiple people, is ustedes. A few points are worth noting about these pronouns. First, there are different ways of saying you in Spanish. This may seem a bit complicated for newcomers at first, but should get easier as time goes on. Second, some pronouns have gendered forms. In these cases, the pronoun takes one form if it refers to a group of all men or a group of men and women, and another form if it refers to a group of all women. And third, it's worth noting the categories that these pronouns can fall into. You'll notice that when listing these pronouns, I place them into 6 different categories, and generally speaking, these categories reflect the way that verbs get conjugated. So, for example, the I form of a verb, such as I eat, gets conjugated one way, and the we form of that verb gets conjugated another way. Both of these forms change in a unique way. However, he, she, and you, when talking to one person formally, are bunched together in the same box in this chart, and that's because they're all conjugated in the same way. The same thing goes for they and you when talking to multiple people. To a large extent, this pattern holds, and so when learning to conjugate verbs, you'll often learn the 6 different forms that correspond to these 6 pronoun categories. And finally, 6, regular versus irregular verbs. I already told you that verbs will change in order to communicate different kinds of information, but that raises the question of how they change. In many cases, it's according to a predictable set of rules. Verbs that do this are called regular verbs. In contrast, verbs that don't follow these rules are called irregular verbs. In the following videos in this playlist, I'll focus on the rules that guide how to conjugate regular Spanish verbs, while briefly covering irregular conjugations later on. That's all for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you did and would like to support this channel, you can do that in a number of ways. Also, if you noticed any mistakes, feel free to let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and take care.